Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on fall referendum developments. But first, shifting talk on pipeline routes.
We've been really clear on some of these issues, particularly, as you'll note, on the tanker ban. And if this report indicates federal government acceptance of that point of view, I think that's a good development.
Political response in BC to a Globe and Mail report suggesting Ottawa prefers a southern route for a proposed pipeline at the heart of the MOU agreed to by the Smith and Carney governments, a project proposal that has yet to reveal a private sector proponent. And joining us now to discuss the developments, Richard Masson, former CEO of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. Richard, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Great to be here, Michael.
All right, so the Globe and Mail based its coverage on information from a pair of unnamed federal sources, but surprised to see the emergence of this particular messaging around Alberta, or actually Ottawa, eyeing a southern route.
Not very surprised. We've been having some conversations about this for a few months now. There have been a number of folks saying that maybe this is a better way to go. Trying to remove the tanker ban probably presents lots of uncertainty. It could easily get tied up in court by those Indigenous groups that have some traditional rights in that area, and that doesn't help move a pipeline forward. So people have been looking at the southern route along the existing Trans Mountain corridor, potentially with a different terminus, maybe at Roberts Bank, to be, as an alternative route, something that could get done with less conflict and maybe quicker.
Okay, so how do you see this maybe changing dynamics around the MOU and work the Smith government is already in the process of doing and pursuing the pipeline pitch?
Well, I think the MOU said that the West Coast pipeline could require the tanker ban to be amended, but it didn't say it would be amended because it left open where's the actual pipe going to be. And we haven't heard any proposal yet from a private company or from anybody about where it would go. I think that what Alberta is trying to do is find a route that could be viable, right? It needs to be economically viable, meaning the cost has to be reasonable, the tariff has to be competitive with other pipelines like the existing Trans Mountain and the expansion of it. It needs to have producer support as shippers. It needs to have Indigenous support. It needs to have regulatory certainty to allow it to happen on a reasonable time frame. And you got to look at the pros and cons of all those things. The amount of money Alberta's put in, I think, is $14 million, which is a very high-level scoping study to this point. It's not anywhere close to a full application for a pipeline, so we'll just have to see what happens as we move forward here.
Okay, so much of the discussion to this point seems to have focused on a pipeline that would go up to the northwest coast. Is that a preferable option from where the energy industry is concerned? Even where the Alberta government is concerned, or is it kind of up in the air, one or the other?
On paper, the northern route looks good because it's got a deep water port. It's relatively open water to get to Asia. You can take the very large crude carriers, 2 million barrel tankers in there. On paper, it looks good, but the route to get there is very difficult. You have to go through some very challenging mountain terrain. The river is very wide. It's hard to get past. And so when Enbridge looked at Gateway, they chose not to go to Prince Rupert. They chose to go to Kitimat, which is on a long channel. And that created a whole bunch of concerns for Indigenous groups in that area. They were afraid, well, what happens if a tanker runs aground in one of these channels and the oil fouls that channel? And so now Alberta, I think, is looking at Prince Rupert as well as two channels that are north of Prince Rupert. And there's pros and cons, I'm sure, to all of those. I haven't got any particular information, but it does make a challenging pipeline construction if you're going to go to any of those places, I think.
Okay, so if it is a southern route, then how straightforward is building another pipeline along, say, the current TMX route?
And that's the potential. The Trans Mountain Pipeline's operated safely since the 50s. We expanded it by twinning it with a bigger piece of pipe next to it over the last number of years. Of course, it took too long and cost too much, but we had relationships put in place with many Indigenous groups and local communities, impact to benefit agreements, they call it, where now they're earning revenue for hosting that pipeline. And so there's a lot of work that's already been done, environmental work, studies, all those kind of things that could help the new pipeline move quicker. So that's one of the benefits. People are more familiar with it. When you're used to something, it's less scary, and I think that could be one of the reasons the southern route starts to gain more traction.
Now, given the EB government has long maintained a no-go stance to the drive for a pipeline to the northwest coast, what strikes you then about the comments we heard a moment ago from Adrian Dix?
Well, I think the BC government has been pretty consistent on this. They view what's going on in the northern coast, the Prince Rupert area, LNG Canada expansion, Salinas, the other Cedar LNG. They look at that and say there's a lot of projects happening up there already, and we don't want to upset the apple cart, and we don't want a big fight with Indigenous communities that would make existing billions of dollars of investment stall. And so I think they've been much more open to a southern route, and we'll just have to see if Alberta is willing to buy into that.
How much do you expect more in the Middle East and the degree of impact that's having on energy markets and the flow of oil and gas to accelerate private sector embrace now of the Premier's push for an added pipeline? Do you see dynamics around viability changing regardless of route?
Well, there's certainly more need for Canada to provide oil to the world. I mean, that's going to carry on for decades, I think, following this war. And there's more, value coming to the oil. And so companies are going to have more money to spend growing production. Our bottleneck has always been market access. And the question becomes, can we get a pipeline built? These pipelines we're talking about probably can't be built in much under 10 years. So they're not helping the immediate problem. What's going to help is Trans Mountain debottlenecking, maybe 250 or 300,000 barrels a day. Enbridge has got 400,000 barrels a day of debottlenecking planned. There's, resurrecting Keystone XL in some form might add another 500,000 barrels a day. And any new pipeline has to compete with all of those things. And there has to be enough volume to fill them all for a new pipeline to be viable. So I think we're going to see a lot of new investment coming into the oil industry, a lot of cash flow generated from the higher prices. And we're going to continue to be talking about market access issues for the coming decade because that's the bottleneck.
And maybe as a final question, Richard, to build off of that last point there, the Alberta government just recently announcing new deals involving South Korea, a country which is waiving a 3% tariff on Canadian oil. What do you see that signaling about expanded demand from Asia, even interest in investment, to your point earlier, investment here?
I think the countries in Asia are going to be very desperate to get Canadian oil. And Korea taking off that 3% tariff effectively on a $100 barrel of oil, that's $3 a barrel. In normal times, shipping oil on a tanker from Canada to Korea is less than $3 a barrel. So it's a big deal to take that tariff off. It just shows that they felt that they couldn't compete well enough against China, who's become the predominant buyer of oil off the Trans Mountain pipeline. And so they're changing their system to make sure that they're more competitive. And I think they see us as a reliable long-term supplier, which we are. And we just need to make sure we work with them and welcome their investment to help make sure we can get our resources to market to help this global need.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate your time as always, Richard. Thank you.
Anytime, Michael.
Richard Masson is former CEO of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. From the Premier delivering an update on the fall referendum to opposition participation in a new review of electoral boundaries and shifting perspectives on pipeline routes. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Mark McQuaig-Boyd, former MLA and cabinet minister, and John Brennan, political analyst and commentator. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with developments on the planned province-wide referendum that is scheduled for the fall. The Premier and the Justice Minister announcing late this morning the launch of a new government website.
The website we are launching today will include information on when the referendum will take place and how the results will impact our province. Importantly, the website makes it clear what this referendum is and what it isn't. We want Albertans to understand what a yes vote means and the actions our government will take as a result. I've said it before and I'll say it again. My job as Premier of Alberta is to give Albertans hope that Canada can work.
It was back in February the Premier announced intentions to put 9 questions to Albertans in an October 19th referendum, including proposals to restrict social services from some immigrants. Today's announcement comes as the May deadline approaches for the group Stay Free Alberta and its petition collecting signatures for a referendum on separation. Mark, I'll start with you. What's your read on the government's messaging here, the perspective it's portraying through this website?
Well, I think they want to project transparency, that they're going to provide information. I've just had a cursory look at the website, so I haven't looked at the wording of the questions. One question I had, and I assume maybe in the presser they answered, is how are they going to incorporate the Forever Canada petition and the Water Not Coal and any others that may come up. But I'm sure it's answered on the website. But I'll have to look through it and have a better answer later. But I'm curious how they're presenting the information.
John, why launch this today? Is there a significance that comes with the timing?
Who knows, Michael? You know, this is all part of Danielle Smith's plan to manufacture consent for her Alberta sovereignty agenda. This is something that she campaigned on back in 2022 when she was running for the leadership of the United Conservative Party. You know, a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. And all the things that she did last year with the Alberta Next panel, it's all about trying to manufacture consent for Alberta to essentially be a sovereign entity within Canada. That's why she's pursuing these plans to get rid of the Canada Pension Plan and create an Alberta Pension Plan, to get rid of the RCMP and create an Alberta Police Force. And so all of these questions that she's asking in the October referendum are further to that agenda for making Alberta a unique political entity within Canada.
Mark, how significant is it that this comes as the separation petition enters the home stretch?
I'm trying to figure out the significance there. There is one. I'm just not sure what it is yet. But I think, you know, she's projecting, what she said she's going to do. I'm curious how she's going to manage that petition along with the other one. And I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical of this whole process, just in that I had attended some of those town halls, and they were very skewed to what the answers they wanted to get were. So the only other thing I can think of is she's taking off to Europe, and maybe that's going to bring some comfort to investors that she's addressing these issues.
And maybe on that point, John, how do you see this website may be landing with those who favor separatism, even those within the UCP base that support such?
Well, I suspect that UCP supporters that support separatism will support all of these initiatives, will support all of these referendum questions, Michael. But I don't think that will dull their support for supporting separatism. You know, and as we saw in most recent polling, Michael, the 55% of UCP voters support separatism versus 97% of NDP voters that oppose it. So there's a real political dynamic in this province where supporters of the Alberta NDP totally oppose this whole separatist agenda, whereas UCP supporters are split. You know, 55% of them support it, about 45% don't. That's why Danielle Smith is doing everything she can to support, you know, what the separatists are doing, because she wants to keep them in the tent, because she wants to maintain the unity of the United Conservative Party.
All right. Up next for us, developments in ongoing debate over the redrawing of electoral boundaries in our province, including this suggestion from the Leader of the Opposition.
If the Premier is being sincere that she likes the majority report, then the easiest, fastest, swiftest way to do this is for us to beg all 5 of those commissioners, including the Conservative appointees, to come back on the panel and look at a 91-seat map. Now,
earlier this week, the Government Caucus used its majority in the legislature to take a second run at new riding maps previously proposed by a bipartisan committee, this time with a committee of MLAs overseeing a new advisory panel. And while the opposition had called the new review illegitimate. Naheed Nenshi now says his party will appoint MLAs Kathleen Ganley and Christina Gray to participate in the process. John, the opposition really doesn't have a choice where participation is concerned. There's no way the party would boycott involvement in this review, would it?
No, it can't boycott the process, Michael, because as Nenshi said, they have to be in the room so they know what's going on. But he's also right that it's a totally illegitimate process. You know, the Legislative Assembly should have adopted the majority report. That's what always happens with electoral boundaries commissions. But of course, the UCP government, Danielle Smith, decided not to do that. So now we've gone back to this new political process where a committee dominated by UCP MLAs will oversee the drawing up boundaries on 91 ridings and to have an advisory committee advising them. So it's a totally illegitimate process and it shouldn't be happening. But, you know, they have the legal and the legislative right to do what they're doing.
Mark, if we dial back the clock a bit, when your party was in government, ridings were redrawn based on a final report from the Electoral Boundaries Commission. Wasn't your riding one of those impacted? How did your government deal with the dynamic at that time?
Yeah, my riding actually got pretty much eliminated and moved into the one that Todd Lowen had at the time. So yeah, there were 3 or 4 of us, and quite a few of the rural MLAs were affected. You know, we certainly discussed it in caucus, and you know, a few of us whined about our concerns that we were losing, you know, our representation in that. But at the end of the day, we respected the process, and I appreciated that Rachel did not interfere, even though, you know, in my case, it probably affected quite a bit my chances. It did affect my chances of getting reelected because we respected the process, and we were aware that if we interfered at all, it did look like gerrymandering and becoming a political process, which, you know, rather than what it was meant to do is try to right size some of them. And, you know, rural constituencies are getting smaller all the time, so they do need to be looked at. And yeah, so at the end we had our say, but we respected the process and went with it.
All right, we need to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, shifting discussions on potential pipeline roads. Are there signs of progress? More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. We heard from energy industry insider Richard Masson off the top on building dialogue around the federal government potentially favoring a southern route to Vancouver for a new pipeline over a path to Prince Rupert and a deepwater port on the west coast. Mark, what impact do you see this potentially having on the Alberta-Ottawa MOU process? Is this a development that could even speed it up, get the Smith government closer to the goal of another pipeline?
Yes, I believe following the southern route, you know, will be quicker. As Richard said, the northern route on paper makes a lot of sense, but it's just there's so many things going against it that it's not going to be done quickly. And I think the southern route, you know, there's probably not many or none, new environmental studies need to be done. It's been proven to be a safe corridor for it. The biggest challenge will be the port and how they handle the extra traffic and perhaps dredging the port more. But I think it'll go a lot faster for sure.
John, what kind of pressure do you see this putting on the Carney government? Or might this be messaging it once leaked without coming right out and saying it at this point?
Well, it's hard to know what their motivations are, Michael, but, you know, Marg is right, and as Richard Masson explained, it would make it easier to build a new pipeline to follow the existing Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion route, because the route is already there, the engineering and technical analysis has already been done, and they already have economic benefit agreements with all the Indigenous First Nations along the route, so they can revisit all of those. The problem will become the bottleneck at the other end, because the Westridge facility where the Trans Mountain Pipeline ends, just outside of Burnaby, is already operating at capacity. There's no additional room there to add more oil tanks. So I'm not sure where the terminus for this pipeline would be, Michael. You know, idea maybe would be to extend it all the way to, say, the Point Roberts area or the area just adjacent to Tsawwassen, where tankers could come and load up there. But, you know, that's opening up a whole other can of worms of trying to get the pipe from Burnaby through the Fraser Delta right on the west coast.
Mark, we heard the clip of the BC Energy Minister off the start of the conversation with Richard Masson. What do you take away from how the EB government is responding to these developments? Could this be a sign it's actually more amenable to a southern road as opposed to the very distinct opposition to the Northwest?
Yeah, I think politically they can manage a route that goes to the south. It is going to be more difficult for them in the north. So I think that's a sign that there probably has been some discussions going on that they can politically manage that, and it'll be an easier sell. And everybody, you know, our Prime Minister's been saying he wants to get things done quickly. This will be one where there can be a win for their government, a win for the federal government, and a win for the industry.
John, where Alberta is concerned, how do you see political dynamics playing out around this shifting focus from a northern route to one that might potentially mirror existing pipelines to lower BC?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, Michael, it's a positive development in that there's a good working relationship now between the government of Alberta and the government of Canada, between Danielle Smith and Mark Carney. And we've also got time to decide where the route is going to be, whether it's going to be the southern route along the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion route, or whether it's going to be, you know, the northern coast, Prince Rupert. And because as Richard Masson explained, and he's right, because others have made the same point, there are other pipeline expansion plans in the works right now. Enbridge is going to expand their main line by about 150,000 to 200,000 barrels a day this year. Trans Mountain already has plans in the works to expand the existing pipeline egress by about 300,000 barrels a day to various needs. And we've also got the Bridger pipeline proposal, you know, to once again look at revisiting the Keystone XL pipeline, but only doing it by a different route. And if all three of those come into play, Michael, it's going to mean we're not going to need this new West Coast pipeline for 3 or 4 years. So they've got the time to put the plans in place to make it work, whether it's the southern route or to the northern coast.
Mark, last question to you. The ongoing war in Iran, how much pressure do you see this bringing to the whole pipeline viability dialogue?
I think it's bringing a lot of pressure to make some decisions and get going. I don't believe it's going to be sorted out in the next while, and there's certainly a backlog of ships. It's going to take forever to get them through the strait once it's cleared. So I think it's really brought a lot of understanding to people that we do need to do something to ensure our own energy security and you know, we have lots of customers who want our energy in the Asian market. And this is an opportunity to maybe, you know, do the best we can given the times and given the concerns, and just let's get at it.
All right, we're clear out of time. Have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
to see you,
Michael.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News, that being about the Premier wanting Albertans to give year-round daylight time a try before potentially putting it to a vote next year. To that, David responds, we already voted on this just a bit ago. What happened to respecting our choice? And what does that say about other referendums? DC agrees, saying, I already voted against this idea in 2021. But Scott notes, Saskatchewan has been doing it since forever. What's the big deal? And She Nemesis says, changing the time twice a year is beyond stupid. It messes up your sleep pattern and serves no real purpose. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, as the Smith government prepares to ditch twice-a-year clock changes, we will hear from the government official who guided Yukon's transition 5 years ago. That's on Friday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.